the webinar is live. Welcome back, folks, to another week of the lunchroom. I see our attendees trickling in, which is always a very positive sign. Those of you who join us regularly, shall we say lunchroom repeat customers, know that I'm going to just talk for a minute by myself, just to allow folks time to join the room and not miss anything crucial. So welcome again. I hope everyone is having a great day. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with A.R.T. and the lunchroom. We're always happy to see you in whatever capacity we're seeing you via this Zoom webinar. I'm going to soliloquy for another 10 seconds. It's very nice out where I am today, and I hope the weather is excellent where you all are calling in from as well, because the sun is giving me a lot of positivity, which I think is sorely needed, especially given the temporal context that we're in. So hope everyone's enjoying a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I am Sarah Schofield-Manser. I am the A.R.T's Assistant Director of Special Events and Partnerships. I use the she series of pronouns. I'm a light-skinned white woman sitting in a swivelly computer chair, so you may see me rocking a little bit around. I've got very dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. I've got headphones, and I'm wearing a sort of red and black patterned collared shirt today. I decided to dress up a little bit for the occasion of this afternoon's lunchroom. It's always very exciting for me. I do want to take a moment and acknowledge the Indigenous land that I am calling in from today and that the Loeb Drama Center and Oberon occupy. I'm calling in from the land, the Indigenous and unceded territory of the Wabanaki, Pennacook, and Pentucket people. And the land that Oberon and the Loeb Drama Center occupy is the Indigenous and unceded territory of the Massachusetts people. And I would encourage everyone to investigate the Indigenous land that you're calling in from today. I'm going to put a resource in the chat for you to check out. It's just a starting point. So I encourage you to investigate the Indigenous peoples whose land you are on, and then learn more about them separately from this resource. So I just drop that in the chat, and I hope you all take a moment to check that out later. A few quick housekeeping things before I invite our fantastic panelists today to join me. As usual for the lunchroom, we're going to have about 40 to 45 minutes of discussion, but we will reserve the last 15 minutes for audience Q&A. If you at any point have a question you would like to submit, please put it in using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So note that that's separate from the chat feature that I just wrote to you all in. It's the Q&A feature. It's the best way to get us to see your question. And although I'll be monitoring the chat during the course of the conversation, our guests will not be, so that they can really focus on each other and the discussion topics that they are diving into. So if you have any questions in the chat, I'll do my best to answer them. But if you have questions for our panelists, please put it in using the Q&A feature. Fantastic. Without further ado, I would love to have my fantastic panelist guests, discussants, shall we say, in more academic fashion, turn on their cameras and join me on screen. So Anna and Lisa, yes, hello, welcome to the lunchroom.
Hello, Sarah.
Here. Hi, Sarah.
So happy to have you here. I am at this point going to grace you out and allow you to carry the conversation for the next little bit, but I'll come back to moderate Q&A at the end of the hour, and I'll be hanging out on the back end answering questions in the chat. So I'll see you in a little. Have fun.
Thank you.
Bye, Sarah. Thank you. Hi, Lisa. So good to be with you. I'm Anna Fitzloff. I'm the managing director at American Repertory Theater. I use the She series, and I am calling in from the Indigenous and unceded land of the Massachusetts people. I am wearing a beige turtleneck, and I have long, dark brown hair. I am a light-skinned woman, and behind me is a red poster and a painting.
I am Lisa Yancey. I am the president of Yancey Consulting. I am videoing in from the Lenape land, unceded territory, and Wappinger specifically. I am wearing a textured tangle brim cap, gold hoop earrings, a floral orange and blue shirt that is silk, a gold chain that my father gave me that has some symbol to symbolize his love, and a septum ring that matches the hoops in my earrings. My skin is caramel brown, and my hair is braided in cornrows and kind of lingering down to my waist.
Thank you, Lisa. So good to be here with you. I have already said this before, but some of my colleagues invited me to be on the lunchroom, and I get very nervous speaking. But when I knew I was talking to you, I was so excited to carry on this conversation because of the work that we're undertaking right now at the A.R.T, how exciting it is and how hopeful it feels in this moment. And I've just had incredible conversations with you. And this, I know, runs the gamut for all of my colleagues. Like every time someone has an opportunity to talk to Lisa, we're like, oh, you're so lucky. So I lucked out here and took the opportunity to do this. And I would love to talk about some of the things I first heard you say when we met. I believe it was actually July or August. I can't believe it was that long ago already, but that really stood out and felt to me that there was like a through line between your practice and your work and the work that the A.R.T has done in producing and programming, but now is really focused on as we enter into this partnership with you. So one of the things that, last summer, when the A.R.T BIPOC Affinity Group wrote a statement to myself and leadership about the anti-racism or the racism that they were seeing within our institution. And I, at that time, many were asking, and staff too, that we have more training, that we have implicit bias training, anti-racism training. And we brought this to you. We said, this is what we need, that we would like you to facilitate some training for us, which I think you've probably heard many times. And your answer was so clear and resonant. And I'd love for you to talk to me about that moment and that part of your practice.
Absolutely. So first, I want to just lift up how wonderful it is that we continue to be in a time where people can and continue to do, in spite of, document their demands, document what the needs are, where the oppression exists. There is sometimes I have my own internal question. I'm like, am I being liberated to something or from something? And in my own exploration of where my agency lives and where I am clear of the non-negotiables. And so powerful to enter that this conversation today, happening on January 19th, is as a result of people cultivating and coming together and organizing around shared values that is anti-oppressive and to eliminate, but certainly mitigate white supremacy culture. So start with that. But when it comes to training, so very often, the key mission of Yancey Consulting is transformation. So if you go to our site, the first thing is like mission, transformation. Transformation to what? To just, equitable, thriving societies, right? And so transformation is not just simple change, right? Like once you transform, we often look at tadpole. A frog will never be a tadpole once it's transformed to a frog. No, it's already become something else. And often the impetus for training has an implied undercurrent that if you do this thing for this short amount of time, then you will be done. Then you would have received, embodied, and can manifest craft. But my background is in dance and choreography. I know people who trained as athletes. I know people who train as scientists. I know people who actually train. And any kind of short-term, weekend, 5 months, 6 months, I believe you can have proximity. I believe that you can elevate mindfulness. I believe that you can capture fundamentals. But to presume that you are now trained is an overstep that sets you up for failure. And it sets you up to critique others that doesn't allow us all to grow. A principle in movement building is come as you are, grow as you do. Right? If you come in thinking that now I'm trained, it's just assume that there isn't a persistent and consistent refinement of the craft and a commitment to daily, constantly sharpening those tools. So we always say this isn't training. Training is a lifelong commitment, and you're committing to refining your craft. You're committing to investigating. Feeling the pain, getting through that pain, feeling the pain again, going to the other side, building your muscle, building your breath, building your stamina, building your ability to not be fragile. That all comes with the actual exposure and experience of continuation of doing the work. So that's our belief on training.
Thank you. And thank you for lifting that, because I think that, over the course of the last 6 months, the opportunity to have these conversations internally at the A.R.T., not just with the Yancey Consulting colleagues, but also within our departments. It's part of these conversations to habituate these conversations, to make certain that they are central to everything we're thinking about in the future. It's part of that modeling that we'll get into the conversation about the fundamentals session and how do we model that. And I feel that it is a collective movement to do that. And to be able to have that conversation, I feel like we're building those muscles to have those conversations and to have them consistently and really understand what we're talking about, which I'm so grateful for. Something that you said early on was about generational impact. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and what that means to you and how you see us moving into the future with that.
Mm-hmm. I ground my views by Lisa, and then thus through Yancey Consulting as the founder of that company. But now my team also, because they're individuals, believe in this idea from the Iroquois philosophy. So Iroquois philosophy believes that you have to have intention, that whatever you do can create a sustainable world 7 generations from now. So it's called the 7th generation principle, and that there's clarity of deliberation. So deliberation requires us to hold a mindfulness that even if we're looking at what our directions and plans are for the next 3 years, for 2021, for the next 10 months, for the next 5 years, that we are holding a light that our actions today, the consequence of them is not just limited to our lifetime. That we are seeding the ground, we're picking the mantle from those who were holding the future for us, a future that they knew that they would not experience, but still fighting, building, excavating. And so we hold a mindfulness for generational thinking. And I think generational thinking, and often when people think about the sustainable world, and you think it's only in the ecological sense of water and energy and land, but it's relationships too. And as we build and understand how we unlearn this supremacy culture and relearn greater humanity towards an equitable and even more holistic world, those sustainable relationships will redefine how we not only see each other, but how we see ourselves, and how we even understand what the we is and where the binds are. What Lila Watson talked about, if you come here to help me be on your way, but if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And that binding isn't solely race or ethnicity or other kind of layered identity markers. It's values, it's goals, it's desires, it's the thing that you care about, it's how you see yourself in the world, who you see yourself with in the world, and whether or not your understanding of your positioning is contingent upon the oppression of others. Like, we're not bound up. If for you to stand, someone else needs to be underneath your feet. That's not. So we hold that understanding of generation, because what we're doing today is what those who will follow us will be learning.
And that seems how, when you talk about really working with a group like ourselves, it's you're in partnership with us. We're standing on the same ground. Really talk about that, and I appreciate that so much. And another thing that was really striking to me, you used words that were almost verbatim something I've heard Diane Paulus talk about, which is when our audiences come to the theater, we want them to not only use their minds, but have their hearts engaged in that space and really feel themselves in that space. And you talked about that, connecting our hearts and our minds. And it's part of that humanity, seeking that humanity in one another, I think, that you're referencing also.
Yeah, I mean, we fully believe, we have this philosophy that's called head, heart, being. Because in doing the work and grounding what is our theories around how transformation actually works? So how do we make sure we're just not changing something at the moment, given the environment it's in, and thus it may look like that thing because of the environment, but when the environment changes, it changes to something else. We believe that you have to understand something, but it can't ever just stay in your head. Because then it's in the rhetorical space. If you don't feel, we act on what we feel.
Absolutely, 100%, right?
We feel fright, we act. We feel love, we act. We know what we feel. And if we are looking to become, that action leads to the being. And if you don't feel it in your heart, because often this work is the heart work. It feels hard, but it's heart work. It's expanding your heart in places that you may not have considered before, because you had relational proximity to that before. And this is asking you to stretch those particular muscles. But you have to feel. We do what we feel. And I've said this to you in one of our conversations before, and someone has said this to me, so I'll say it to this wonderful group that I'm imagining in my head. And that everything you say is true. And what I mean by that is, if I say, I can't do this, this doesn't work, no matter what, that is absolutely true, because you set that intention, you feel it, you're setting it in your cells, you're putting it in your body. But if you say, I got this, when the first thing that comes your way, that's when it trip you up, you're like, I got this. We are doing this not just for me in this moment. We're doing this for 7 generations. So I have to have this. I can't walk away. I am here. I'm a steward of the now time for the transformation time. Then I have to stay in. And so that's heart, that's feeling, that's passion work.
It's so interesting. I think as I'm listening to you speak, as an arts organization, or a staff member at an arts organization, we're very used to the practice of artists, right? We're used to rehearsal. We're used to watching something go through the preview process, come to life on stage, and then get tweaked until it's finally ready. And I feel like you've embraced that, right, in your practice. And that's why I feel like, we understand this. We understand the process that you are leading us through right now, and how we are starting to see it take place. I feel like we're writing the script, if you will. We're doing table reads really around this. So I want to talk a little bit more about the process that you've helped us embark on, and what we're going to really get started deeply with this week. So I'm super excited about it. So one of the things that we have designed through the scope of work with you is to build building and weaving teams. So we identified as a leadership team, and also from the affinity group statement, 7 areas of focus that we wanted to focus on: building and capital campaign, decision making, board and executive leadership, internal and external investments, workplace culture, mission, vision, values, and programming and engagement. And within those groups, we were going to have teams of both board and staff participate, up to, I think, 13. Some groups are a little bit more because we have lots of people who want to participate. And when we started to reach out, this small group of staff and I started talking to board members and to staff, we started to really build these teams, really think about who's going to be at the table, who wants to have these conversations, and who wants to engage in that conversation very specifically with staff and board. And I had a phone call with 2 folks from your team, Kelly and Justina, and I was trying to ask lots of questions, like trying to figure it out. Like, so these teams we don't have a definition for them. So as I'm having conversations with them, do you have some keywords I should be suggesting just to help describe for them what the process would be? And they're like, it's going to be a little messy. They're like, don't be too prescriptive. I'm like, okay. So for me, who's like trying to be very linear and thoughtful and express to everyone what their time commitment's going to be, but I can't really tell you all of the conversations you're going to have yet. Right. It was the best piece of information, though, for me to really be thinking about, like, allow it to be a little messy. And once I opened that up, having these conversations, it was actually easier to express, right?
Yeah.
What what they might be focusing on and understand to trust the process, which I was so grateful for. And I know you too have had dozens of conversations with staff and board members who've reached out to you personally, which will also inform that process. So it's just been, for me, an incredible experience already. And I know that my colleagues may not have had all of that time yet, but they did get to have an opportunity with you. Was it 2 weeks ago already? For a fundamental session around anti-racism and anti-oppression. And that was an amazing experience. We just come off of the break around New Year's, and it was one of the first gatherings we had as a company at that time. And the feedback we got from staff in particular was the hope that was coming from that meeting. Mm-hmm. And it just, I was so grateful for you allowing for people to just kind of spread that experience over 2 hours, right? It just felt like there was time for people to respond and think and process. And someone actually said in our company meeting, it felt lighter. And we also enjoyed, there was silence at times, right? We were able to hold that silence together as a collective and feel like good in that silence, right? Whereas in the past, I think silence could have been fraught. Could have been fraught. So I'm just so excited about what's coming for those folks who are participating in the building and weaving team. And just for those who are tuning in. So the building and weaving teams will then each have a board and staff representative that will filter into the kitchen cabinet. And that group is going to work on the plan that will embed anti-racism and anti-oppression within the A.R.T. So I would love to know more about how that practice has grown and changed over time for you, and what you're gathering right now just from watching us go through this.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things I'll just bring to note around the intentionality. So I talked a few minutes ago about being deliberate and intentional, and also being open. And even I was thinking, while you were talking about theater, and it made me think about when I was in college, which was it wasn't the last time I was on stage, it was all dance, but the last time it was theater specific, it was in college for college girls. And you go through these processes and you're doing rehearsing, but you still have these moments where you have to figure something out, even with all the rehearsals when you're doing the show. And that's the part of just having the breath to know that what you're doing is building the muscles and building the reference. So when the unknown shows up, you have the vocabulary, you have the experiential reservoir, right? You built some equity to be able to call on that thing when it wasn't prepared. When you weren't prepared for it, because you've been preparing for it. You just didn't know that it was going to be the show up. And I think that's the key thing. So a couple of things I want to say, and you sharing. And it's great when you hear back, like people are feeling like, this is great. And I'm sure there are people who are like, this is awful. And I know that, right? I was nervous, and I was like, oh my God, this is awful. Because we're doing marketing work. It shouldn't always feel like this is great. It should feel breath. It should feel safe. You should feel heard. You should know, come as you are, that we are not doing shame culture. We're here as a team to build together, to learn together, to oops and ouch together, without feeling like something's going to be held against you. Right? The huge reference that we're leading. And I see it less as, it's less about leading. And part of the conversation from the beginning with the team as a thought partner is partnership. So there's equanimity in the partnership. So we literally are in this together. There's no, I'm leading you here. I'm doing my role to unlock, provoke, facilitate, collaboratively imagine, which are our verbs for Yancey Consulting as our partner to you. To inspire, to make you feel the breath, but to also push you on the rigor, to make you question the things that you may presume is fundamental and say, but what's another way that cannot be true? Because that other way, that alternative universe already exists. And so the building and weaving teams, for those who don't understand the structure, the language of building and weaving is we are already modeling. So we're not going to start the process. The process started when we both said yes to each other, when we both recognized that we have the power and agency to choose, and that we're going to collaboratively work through what the things are that you need, and that we're going to create a space to elevate mindfulness, provide clear tactics around it, set priorities, and then build pathways. Build pathways when those priorities and those tactics are set up so that you can model it in perpetuity, because we're not going to be with you in generations. We're not even going to be here 7 generations. We don't want to do something that has a clothesline loop that you can't tap into. So board and staff, and also any other stakeholders that may be involved into the process, because the building and weaving team may say, we need additional perspectives. We need additional perspectives because the way that we're thinking directly impacts communities who are not at the table. And so here's where we're holding our limitations. Let's create spaces for that conversation to happen. And they're building and weaving. Building visionaries is from that ecological ecosystem understanding that we are coexisting in abiotic and abiotic, non-living and living systems, that we are working together around, whether we're producers or consumers or neutralizers, right? Like they were taking in, cycling a certain waste from the ecosystem. We need to have all of that in the thinking and the element. So if you think about the specific areas that you name that came from the prioritization and engagement with A.R.T. team, you decided that collectively, not an individual, not leadership. This was from everyone. Those areas allow you to go deep. Think about it in the vertical. You can root into the grounding, knowing that you're already holding expansiveness. And we're intentional about using language like kitchen cabinet because symbolically, kitchens have played a very clear and active role in movement building and organizing. It's certainly the nourishing place. It holds a whole lot of laughter and tears. It's the place where you go when you need to be fed. But it has also been a base of uprooting, unlocking, rethinking patterns and behaviors in society. Kitchens have held that space. It's been, as has in my background, church basements, but probably institutions of faith where you can go and have these spaces. So this kitchen is intentional for a kitchen cabinet who's really holding and ensuring that all of the areas that have been identified by the team are being addressed. And if they're not being addressed, there's a collective decision like, yeah, we can't address that right now, but we're not losing it. And the building and weaving can focus on the vertical. But we are partners in supporting the weaving and supporting the thinking and supporting ensuring that we actually get to it while also modeling it in real time. We're not saying a recommendation will be for one day for board and staff to come together and think and strategize and build relationships. No, effective immediately. Right? What are the things that can be effective immediately? Effective immediately is modeling, creating parity. Effective immediately is creating spaces and tools where you can say, I didn't feel safe here without punitive response. Effective immediately is not to just have conversation without any action. And that's what we're modeling, and that's what we're building with A.R.T. and any of the thought partners we have the pleasure of working with.
And so that actually makes me think about the fundamental session a little bit more. And you prompted everyone. There were like 135 people on that call from board and staff coming together and just being guided in that moment. And you asked why now and why are you here? And it's so interesting to me personally because I feel like I'm connecting back to some of the things we've already talked about today. But my instinct is I have 2 young boys. And for me, it's got to be about them. What are the conversations I can have with them? And then my professional life is then influenced by that, is influenced even by that moment, those times with them. So I'm so grateful for that. And then within literally a 48-hour window, staff were repeating that question. What's our role? Why are we here? Why is the A.R.T. here? What are we doing right now? And I just was so grateful for this, as you say, it's like literally threading the needle along with that question and provocation. And you really held everyone in the room together. 135 people on a Zoom is really hard to see everybody. I mean, I have a hard time when I have like 25 in a Zoom room, but to see everybody, and it really feels that you are addressing and speaking to everyone personally. So it's something very interesting. We've also talked about, I think some of us might say it's Zoom fatigue, but you're really seeing something rewarding about being able to have these more intimate moments with people in this work.
Yeah, I found, and I think that fatigue is fatigue, and it's Zoom fatigue. It was fatigue before the Zoom. There's fatigue.
Sure.
I think that there's a lot of invisible work that happens that doesn't get audited. It's often recognized, and this is another area where we can enhance mindfulness that perpetuates fatigue, and it's called upon because it's that invisible work, it's that invisible labor that isn't being recognized as actual expense, of which you are holding the receipt, and no one has paid for that time. But the thing about the Zoom is there's a level of intimacy in this 2D, this exposure that happens that one needs to be mindful of, because we are literally opening our homes that could have different kinds of energetic understandings for the person who's sitting in that space. It may feel crowded, it may feel spacious, it may be the place that you're like, I don't want work in my home. I need work to go home and not bring work here, right? So you're negotiating this new kind of relationship, and you try to figure out if you put something behind you or not. But there's an intimacy that happens, and even though we're looking at a flat screen, you can see, you can feel, I can see when I can actually see sometimes when someone takes a breath, and I'll determine and I believe I can give that to my somatic practice as being a dancer, that I live in the body, and I also give it to my meditative practice of breathing. But I think that the Zoom actually creates opportunities or any kind of digital. So I'll say Zoom, but not necessarily saying only Zoom, but any kind of visual. I'm taking my French classes with my French instructor in Australia, that before this moment of creating this space, I wouldn't have done. I'm talking to my nieces and nephews at least 80 to 90% more that past 10 months than I did probably in the past 4 to 5 years. There's this back to back, but it also created a different kind of accessibility that you still can work towards building parameters around, but it allows for a number of people who I wouldn't normally be sitting in their living room. I would not be in your living room with you at this time. We would not have been invited to this space. And maybe after this, because of this medium, we can. But prior to that practice of keeping what's separate in the spaces that we control is maintained. And this, I believe, may be a portal for us to push past those prior practices.
That's incredible. I also, one of the things that I think about is just it feels more democratic, right? Everyone's kind of in the same, and even the way Zoom reorganizes itself, right? As people come into a conversation, and you start to see everyone, we're all in these linear lines, same size boxes, and so you have to be intentional, right, about seeing each person and talking to each person, but it also feels like we're all holding the same kind of space, right? So it de-emphasizes where there would have been often structures.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a caveat to that. If you have fast, reliable internet, which accessible broadband is not available to all communities. And so the fight for accessible broadband this past 10 months made it really clear why organizations like Next Century Cities, who work with local municipalities around ensuring that every home has access to the internet as a fundamental need and right, not as a fundamental utility, is necessary so that we can all be in a democratic
space. Yeah.
But you don't have access to the internet, one, and if you don't have access to fast internet, we've experienced drops, shortage. It's not democratic. It's not the same. This this is another example of where we can utilize enhancing our mindfulness of where disparities exist and where we our spheres of influence, our advocacy, our understanding to reduce those bridges or advocate for others to also have comfortable, just as you and I can have this conversation right now.
Thank you. Thank you for lifting that. Something else that you and I touched on about a week ago, because I think it's important. You know, it also came up with the survey results from the A.R.T. staff. You know, worry, obviously, lots of excitement about the possibility, but worry about what will happen in the future when we have a return to normal work, if you will, and the busyness of our schedule and our production schedule. And it feels to me that in some part, the response to that is we cannot return to business as usual. We're going to habituate something new. And that's part of this time that we have together. But also you asked me to reflect on, you know, did we take time to ask ourselves why things didn't work before? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And it actually came up in the company meeting last week. And then I talked about the reality for me has been, there was a very small group of us who were really working on a diversity and belonging task force, staff led, and we reported to the board about it, but we really didn't engage beyond our smaller group to the rest of the staff or to the board to really bring the board along in that process. And I think that's, for me, one of the reasons why I'm so hopeful about this process now is because the board has stepped in and been so excited about this process. And really every board member that we have talked to about participating have received so many moments where they have said yes and we'll do something more. I will participate not only in the building and weaving team, but also the kitchen cabinet, and just the amount of volunteer time that has been so affirmative already. It's been incredible. So just thinking about, again, the context of the moment, right? How this moment allows us to be really present here, and how context is so important to the process being successful or how we view the process.
Yeah. A couple of things that's coming up for me as you're talking, and I know there's a question about what success looks like, and I can get into this. My first, I think I feel great success if we move away from hope, because hope is not a strategy, right? So hope is not a strategy. Right, so we talked about the seventh generation is this deliberate intent. So this declaration, this avowance, I avow, I proclaim, I am committed. Now, how would it happen? We can't control everything, but the first part starts that what hope gives you is a space between actually committing and critiquing and being a voyeur, as if you're not also an active participant in the process. And so we can hold hope as an impetus for inspiration, but we can't anchor on it because it doesn't connect to the commitment. And so a successful moment for me for what this process is, those kinds of intentional nuances where, because when it gets hard, because it will get hard, and when it gets sticky, because it will get sticky, and when you're going to be tested, to say, okay, we have greater resources, everyone's been vaccinated, the likelihood of people passing along COVID has been reduced to X, we'll have all this quantitative data. That future is coming before the next crisis, but that future is coming.
Yeah.
So this is the moment among a series of moments, because I don't buy into moment culture either, because every moment is a moment, and every moment is an opportunity to make a decision, be clear on where it is that you stand, where your values are holding you, and what you proclaim. But we realize that we are doing future work that you claim together as a team. We will not regress. There is no sight line to the past. Our sight line is to the future. And this is a future that is standing on these values. And I am a steward of that future. So the sight line isn't, the breath isn't to go back. It's to propel forward. And to propel forward as weaving and building and in cabinetry, right? Together. and create spaces where you can interrogate, because that's the expectation, where you don't have groupthink, because that's the shared value, where you do the kinds of interrogation without shame, that you don't suppress and understand that you are bringing in your power influence that can shape someone's ability to live their lives, right? Like mindfulness is doing that, but you won't go back if you decide as a team you won't go back. And you'll hold collective accountability in that regard. And that, to me, is success. The output from that affirmation by a team, because then it transforms into the culture. We often say the work we do is culture work. Strategy is in service of everything. So often it can be a misnomer, right? We're not doing strategic planning. Strategy is the medium in which we think about our decisions to ensure that we are best utilizing our resources, that we understand our point of positioning, that we're clear in the environment in which we are making such decisions, and that we can adjust when such environments change, because they do. Right? That's not what we're doing. The work we're doing is visioning a better future. The work we're doing is creating a just environment where everyone can, at the very least, sustain and see and be themselves, ideally thrive within that particular environment. And that's the work. And that's success, when we create the culture where people who are not here today come to A.R.T. 10 years from now. It's like, oh, we're a place where we interrogate. Our values are rooted in this. Of course, we can talk to the board because we have meetings together. Like that's just the norm. They're like, what do you mean? What do you mean? We don't engage across? What do you mean we don't hold mindfulness of where there are barriers? And when someone brings up something, that we don't make them feel bad for not knowing, that we always know that we come as we are and we go as we grow. Right. And that becomes the culture. That's a win. And that's not a win that we'll know fully, won't know fully, but you get indicators of it. You get indicators when you say to me 2 days later, people say, why are you here? When people start saying to me, not sorry, we don't say sorry here. We continue to show up. When people come back to say to me, that's when I'm knowing that there is some values alignment that has become embedded into your own personal being. That's the being work. And those are the indicators that we're trending in the right direction.
I'm glad we're recording this because I want to keep taking notes, Lisa. Yes. It's like my habit with you is there's always so much coming in terms of great thinking and things I want to capture. In fact, I did have a note for myself about hope the other day that I wrote with my thumbs in my phone. So it clearly, I didn't get all of it. Because it had the counterpoint. I'll remember later and I'll pick it up with you. But
it can be the foundation for initial inspiration. It can be a launch point, but it's not the point.
Absolutely. I just really wish my thumbs had worked better for me then. Anyway, I am glad this is being recorded because we're already touching on some of the things I think we're thinking about, right? What does success look like? So thank you for that question that's come in already and addressing it. But I'm excited because I'm on the internal and external investments team, which I undoubtedly will be looking at budget and how do we look at budget, in the future. And it's hard, right? Because, for years in this industry, I've had a very formulaic way of looking at things. And it's changed with programming and it's changed with, different roles that I've held within organizations, but, really holding those values first and foremost is it's already for me thinking about, okay, not only the values of the organization, but the way our culture has changed with this pandemic very specifically. What will be the way we return to the theater? And I think those are amazing questions to be facing right now. And, talking to colleagues about the opportunity we have to ask those questions and try to answer them. We're not going to answer them completely, but the opportunity to ask that question and seriously consider alternative answers to what we've been doing is a gift. It's an absolute gift. And I feel really lucky and also excited to jump in with that team and really, struggle with some of that and think about it together, because there's going to be different people at the table than I would normally have those conversations with.
That's a good start. That is the first start, to have different people at the table. I mean, we're doing futuristic work, right? Like I'm sure in some conversation, because it's in my being, to reference Octavia Butler, because I believe that we're Octavia Butlering. If you haven't read Paragraph Sower and so WER, highly recommend it. You will see that but in the 1980s, this was written about what's going to happen in the past 4 years that we've had right now, and we're moving forward. So we're towards futuristic work. The thing that to hold a couple of things. One, there's the luck part of being able to be at the table, but there's a lot of power. And so I want to mitigate and emphasize that the way we have to hold greater mindfulness and ensure that the varying perspectives that are directly impacted by the decisions that are made today, and ideally, maybe 2 generations from now. I want to get to 7, but I know for some, they're like, wait, what? Wait, hold on. If you hold that, if you have a great grand in your life, a grand, a mom, you're already in 4. You're already living. We often get to live in 4. So then if you think about the 3 before that, and generations are typically 20, 25 years, not a whole lot of time. But if we're holding these spaces and looking at these spaces, white people in mass have not had the necessity to learn how to give up things and not be centered. That muscle doesn't exist. So it's going to feel like, wait, you're trying to take from me for yourself. And what about me? What about my future? What about my generation? What about this? And not hold the wait, how am I seeing the entire universe of that? So Darren Walker, a few months ago now, wrote this article about what are you willing to give up? And an artist friend of mine says to me, often, sometimes people need to know it's not their check to cash. And so in thinking about the mindfulness around the investments or the buildings, we're going to be we need to think about the implications, current and future implications, and who aren't we thinking of? That should always be the question, because you're going to have your automatic point of reference, but who are we not mining? That's in our demographic, that's in our community, that's in the community in which this will be situated. It may not even be in the hour yet. Like it may not have expanded to a possessive where there's a personal identity and relationship to that community besides the fact that it's in a city, right? Like that, but you don't know the people, you don't know the culture barriers, you don't know the anchors, you don't know the stewards, you don't know who are the core influencers, you just really don't know. And we go into these places in bewilderment and then think that we can quickly assess, just like trying to quickly assess, quickly decide, and then make some fast decisions. And I think that this is not only an opportunity, but it should be a deliberate decision to dissipate and understand that power and invite and ensure to the extent that our intentions can hold, bringing in varying perspectives, not just as a transactional act of saying we ask someone, but as an intention to know that the content and perspective that they will give that you do not hold, it is not just valuable, it's critical. It's crucial for the future. It's crucial for these values. And the last thing I'll say on this particular point is I have these conversations, I experience it all the time, that people who are who excel in one thing have the false belief that excellence is transferable to all things. And that often that if you excel, I have a brother who is a biochemist and he's a science, he was an MIT Stanford guy, and we would do this work around algae and the ecosystem of algae and creating biomass. And he had all of this on that area, brilliant. First black chemist come out of Stanford, the PhD program, right? At Yancey. Brilliant. You just go 2 steps to the left. It's like, wait, what? There's no mindfulness consciousness, and there's no shame in that. If we recognize that I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know, and thus bring in those who bring in that I don't know, and that I don't have to act and wear the mask that I'm or supposed to know, and then thus my knowledge is transferable, and thus my point of view is transferable. So it should create deference. If we shift that and just like, well, I know this, I don't know that. We need to bring in who's experienced that, and then look at them equally. We are light years ahead. That future forward. So the theater that you're advancing to, not going back to, even in our language, we speak that into existence. The theater that you're advancing to is a futuristic theater that you will design. And you will design and hold with this mindfulness and some agility and openness to still be able to be iterative as you continue to learn, because it won't all happen in this short period of time. Hopefully we get to learn for our whole life.
Lisa, thank you for saying that specifically about the agility, right? That we're going to have to, it's muscle memory. It will continue to adapt. We have to keep coming back to the table, but I'm mindful of the time, and Sarah's helping watch the Q&A for us and has some questions she wants to bring to the table for us. So Sarah, welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you for having me back. I just want to second Anna's joy that we are recording this, because I feel like I was noting, and I'm not happy to be able to go review. So for those of you, some folks have asked, this will be captioned and posted online for folks to return to as a resource. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I do have some amazing questions. I'm just going to jump right in. One question that I'd really like to explore is, what role do you think that our audiences play in our anti-racism work? How can we take our audiences on this journey with our organization? And what can folks do in their personal lives to do the work if they're not part of A.R.T. as an organization?
So I think the role that your audiences play, not just in anti-racism and anti-oppressive work, I'll make an effort to make sure I say the word and not use the acronym, is the role that your audience play as a partner with you and why you even exist. That is a critical role. And so as we understand the ecosystem of where these things are, then the consumer, the producer, like that's part of the relationship. And I mentioned a little bit, and I'd like to be more explicit in that, is that those who have the ability to observe, and I'm also mindful of language like audiences. Sometimes audiences denote those who can actually only pay for. That's the patronage piece. But if we really think about for whom this work is for, and what's our work to create space for those to experience it, irrespective of where they situate in the ability to buy a ticket per se, our work is always to ensure that we understand what's resonant, what's relevant, what's period, across the board, full stop. And so I think that each team will have an ability to identify with whom they may want to engage and what are the best mechanisms of engagement, with those various teams. And then it was like a 3-part question, but I remember the first and I remember the last. The last one was, if you're not a part of A.R.T. and you want to do some personal work, I think that's okay. Kudos. Great. There's a huge list of potential resources. We have a sub-site called the YC Way. That is THEYCWAY.com. There are grounding resources on that site. It's part of an anti-racism, anti-oppressive 5-month learning journey that we're doing with a portfolio of folks. And so go there, and then I am always accessible, and my team is always accessible. And so if we can be supportive in your resourcing, I highly recommend them.
That's amazing. And I just dropped that link in the chat for folks who are interested in checking that out at home. A couple more great questions. And I actually think this kind of dovetails nicely with talking about the resources that you can provide. But Lisa, this person is saying, thank you for being here today. They're really happy to have seen you. They're wondering if you might be able to share a little bit about your firm and practice and sort of the origin story of Yancey Consulting.
Yeah, I'll do that in like 90 seconds.
Great.
So it's in 2001. So now it's 20 years this year. A generation. I am living a generation of a practice. It started out in arts and culture by a wonderful mentor who I still hold as a deep friend, Mickey Shepard. I was coming from Boston, so I went to Boston College, but I was dancing the whole time. with Adrian Hawkins on Mass Ave. I was doing video work and was coming to New York, but I knew I was going to move to New York, where I am now. And when I first came, I thought I was going to do entertainment law until I realized it was just contracts and there was no right for artists, and I couldn't do that. So I met a series of incredible Black women, and Mika Shepherd was one of them. And she was come from Rockefeller. She was doing arts and culture. I didn't know that was a thing. And she said, I'd like to engage you, but I'd like to engage you as a contract. And it was that invitation to be expansive about how my labor was even organized, how my brain was organized, that created the germ for what became Yancey Consulting. And so fast forward, the first from 2001 through 2006 was primarily arts and culture work throughout New York City's boroughs. 2006, it expanded to social justice. I'm doing portfolio work with the Ford Foundation and doing strategy assessment on the Media Action Grassroots Network. So then it moved from social justice to media justice. Public space launched in 2009 with the Highline. I'm really looking at reimagining what engaging communities that's centered in equity means, and not as some program side thing that one do, but not changing all the pieces that they are. And so the way that we assess whether or not we are partners, we look at 5 areas of impact. We first assess that whether or not it's going to be transformative for equitable, thriving society. If it's not that, we're not your partners. We'll have a conversation because we're generous in that way, but we were like, there are plenty of consultants that for partnership. We look at structural and systemic first for culture shifts, economic, leadership development, visibility, and environmental. And environmental is also social environment and actual climate. So, and then intergenerational, and then ecological. And that's how we are right now.
Thank you for sharing, and congratulations on 20 years. That's a massive milestone. That's incredible. Couple questions. I think we might only have time for 1 or 2 more, so I'm so sorry. There are so many great ones in here, but this is something that someone submitted early on in the conversation that I'd like to address, and this is sort of for both of you. This person is saying that they heard us use the term affinity groups in this conversation, and I think they're specifically wondering how our A.R.T. BIPOC affinity group has been included in this process.
Absolutely.
You want to do that, Anna? Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. So initially, I did mention that the BIPOC affinity group wrote a statement to leadership in the summertime, and that was certainly one of the provocations for us to reach out to Lisa and to convene. We actually convened the company in a few conversations that were facilitated early on, and then put together a selection committee of board artists. This actually addresses another question in the chat. Artists, board members, and staff and members of the BIPOC affinity group to speak with different consultants, one of whom was Lisa, and talk about the proposed process to move forward. So we've actually had conversations both with artists. Sorry, I'm answering 2 questions at once because I saw it in the chat, but both our BIPOC affinity group has been brought through all of the different conversations that we've had. We also identified staff members to be anti-racism leads within the organization, and they've continued to have conversations and communicate directly throughout this process with the affinity group. And then our artists, again, in different ways, we've brought artists into the process. So I know that Lisa touched on this just briefly, but in our building and weaving teams, we've actually identified different artists for different building and weaving teams to participate in that process as well. So it's a very iterative process. It has been numerous ways that we're communicating with staff and vice versa, staff communicating with us. Lisa and her team put together a survey, and I'll let you speak to your part of the process too, Lisa. But in terms, one of the things we actually have realized, and I think came out of our company meeting last week, is we now have a weekly company meeting that we reserve 2 to 3 hours with the company each week. And in that time, we talk about numerous things, but often bring up this work with Lisa and steps that we're taking so that it is a direct communication back and forth. And then we also have had a lot of department meetings. And over the course of the fall, we did a community company read of Ibram Kendi's book. So we've had lots of ways of opening up that conversation rather than being, in communication where leadership or myself and others are talking to the staff. Definitely a conversation space has been created. So Lisa, you also have been doing this work. So
this is going to be a little different. So I do want to address the first question that came on about intersectionality, but I'll get to this because I know we're at the time.
Yeah.
That I fully believe in Audre Lorde's quote that there's no thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't lead single issue lives, and that the layers, the more that we understand and enhance our muscles around mindfulness, then the less we will look to conflate activities into any single thing. And so that will be part of the values that continue to be in partnership with you on this work.
Well, thank you both.
thank you.
I cannot believe that we're at time. Every week I am surprised by how quickly the hour flies by, and I'm just really grateful for both of you for having such an informative, engaging, and really uplifting conversation with us today on the lunchroom. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Lisa. Thank you. So good to be with you. All right,
for
take
being
care.
here.
Sarah, take care. Thank you.
So thanks everyone. We'll see you next week on the lunchroom.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.